Sophie, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Do you just want to start by telling us a little bit about your business and how it all got started?
Yeah, for sure. My background was corporate before I started the Fable. I used to work at L'Oreal in the luxury division and loved my job there, but felt like it wasn't what I wanted to do long term. So back in 2014, I left the corporate industry and went to live up in India for a period of time and loved it up there and got the idea to make silk shirts because I'd always worn them back in my corporate life, but never been able to find one which was quite right. So that was basically where the idea came from. And we're nearly 10 years and later with different products, a different range, but still all e-com. And that is basically the Fable in a nutshell. Women's silk shirt, sleepwear and tops, and idea born out of India.
But why silk shirt? Why that specifically? Out of all the different things you could do in the world, why is that what you're most passionate about or decided to pursue?
I had always loved them, right? And I think that's often where people get the ideas. It's something which they felt was missing because they couldn't find the product themselves. And that was very much where I was at. I'd always loved silk shirts and worn them pretty much every day. As a woman working in the corporate world, a perfect staple, and it's something which actually looks nice. I'd always felt like there was a lot of daggy corporate wear out there which cost a fortune and was quite ugly. Whereas I wanted something which looked nice, which looked chic, which you could wear out to dinner and then on the weekend as well, and could never find that in its perfect form. Like the fabric was always quite flimsy, they were super expensive, the cut was never quite right, and I could never find it in the styles that I wanted. And so literally it was born out of the idea of something that I couldn't find as a customer. And also I was thinking further ahead as to what the range could look like and knew that it could be easily expanded because there's a lot of people out there who like silk.
So you've come up with the idea, you've gone with how many products to start with and how many products you have now?
Oh, to start with, it was 3, literally one silk shirt in black, white and navy. And now it would be sort of 70 to 80, I think it would be. So like expanded out for sure, but still kept with the ethos of doing one type of thing and doing it well. I never liked the idea of rolling out a range and doing jeans and everything because I sort of think if you stand for everything, you risk standing for nothing as well.
Right. So when you've come up with the idea, you've rolled out with the first shirts, you obviously knew that you'd like them and they were what you wanted to wear. What sort of feedback did you have from people along the way before you made the shirts and after you made them that gave you inklings as to where this could go?
So initially friends and family, but ultimately that's never the true feedback, right? Because even the most brutal of friends will not tell you entirely what they think because they're wanting to be supportive of what you do. Ultimately, the best vote of confidence is when you first make a product and people who you don't know buy them and they don't return them, right? That's the biggest thing that you want. You want people to buy and not return. And if they love them, they let you know. That's the absolute best possible feedback you can get. And I certainly got that in the early days, which was really encouraging. I think one of the biggest hurdles I had, though, was that being naive in how production works, didn't have a proper quality control. So while there was shirts coming in, some of which were good, it was actually quite difficult to be able to find a solid production run which could come without issues. I ordered 200 or 300 shirts initially, and half of them were unsellable.
Right. How do you deal with that? Because obviously this is the part that people sort of forget about business sometimes, where you look at the story and it says it looks easy and all that sort of stuff, but you've sold the shirts, which you think is half the battle. Then, yeah, you've come across this in terms of the supply chain part of the equation is not what you want. So what do you do next to manage that? Because that seems like a disaster.
In the moment, that absolutely was a disaster. And you almost look at things and say, oh, I can't even do this anymore because you've got your working capital, you go in and you buy your product, half of it is unsellable, your cost of goods has essentially doubled. Well, it has doubled. And you're not sure if you can actually rely on getting product in, which is going to be any decent going forward. So what I decided to do from there was basically spend a lot of time on the ground up in India. Because if you can be up there and you can do your quality control yourself, and this is basically where it was to start with, right? It was just me on a plane, booking one-way tickets to India. That was basically the way I could do the quality control and make sure it worked, right? Because a very difficult thing to deal with is having product land on the ground in Australia after a factory has shipped and you've paid taxes to get them back, to get them fixed. It can't basically be done. You've got to do it before they've left. So that was what I did to make it work. But I certainly learned the hard way that I needed to do that up there on the ground myself rather than rely on a factory to do it, because in the early days, you're not dealing with perfect factory as well. Because in order to get the perfect factory who specializes in silk and does exactly what you want, you've got to have volume. And no factory is interested in making 200 or 300 shirts. It's certainly not the right one. So that's part of the learning, part of the process. If I did it again, I'd do it differently, but you live and learn for where the journey's at the time.
What would you do differently if you were to do it again?
Literally, I'd spend more time up there. I wouldn't have allowed that first batch to come out without me literally checking them myself, because that wouldn't have been a problem. But if I'd been there, I think you sort of take everything which factory owners say with a little pinch of salt as well. You know, inherently they're good people, but they're out there to make a living and they don't want to be writing off stock from their perspective, right? So I think you second guess everything which people tell you in the industry, because equally they know you're naive and you're learning, and so they can at times be opportunistic to that. But if you're there on the ground, you can just do everything yourself and you can make sure that it's all going to be okay.
How do you move away from that mindset of being so hands-on when presumably when you've got to scale the business, you've got to go the other way a little bit and have systems and procedures and things in place so that you can be less hands-on? How did you go with that process?
So that's all about finding the right factory partner, because once you move to the point where you've got a factory which operates at a professional level, they will guarantee something like a 98 to 99% quality control. And then at that point, you're just dealing with pure operators and you're not having to worry about the fact that you're going to have half of your product arrive faulty, right? Once you move to working with professionals, you don't have these issues. And then at that point, you're not changing your factory, providing they can work with the volume that you want, allowing for growth. You basically have a long-term relationship with them. Once they understand that you're long-term as well, it's in their best interest to make sure that you're looked after, they're meeting your QC needs, because then you come back.
Okay, so that's a bit of a chicken and egg thing when you're starting off, where you've got a smaller volume and you've got to build your way up to getting to the right sort of partners that will do that quality, because until you're that size, not interesting to them, and etc.
It's part of the puzzle, and to be honest, it's probably the biggest barrier to entry that there is out there.
What would you say comes to mind as the hardest thing to deal with?
I mean, the hardest thing is always in the early days. You'll get challenges as you go, but none of them can be as great as when you first start, because you've literally got nothing. You're working blind. You're out there trying to create something from nothing. And I mean, from my experience, that's certainly been when it's been the most challenging, for sure. COVID was also an interesting one, mind you, but nothing was as tricky as the early days, because you don't know what you're doing as well, right? Like, I think as you go, when you've got the benefit of experience, you can draw upon some challenges. Okay, well, that happened. I did this. I did that. I could make that work. I can do it again. At least you've got some experience. You know what you're doing. But at the start, I was fresh out of corporate. I had a certain set of experience in trade marketing, but there was nothing to do with production.
And so when you look at sort of your strengths coming from a corporate background, what do you bring into your business that you want to bring from the corporate background? And what do you not want to bring into the business? And from a culture point of view, in terms of what you're trying to develop?
Yeah, so I think what I didn't want to bring was a slow moving pace. And I think that's naturally inherent to what goes on inside a big company, because everything takes time to move, right? It's harder to adapt, harder to be nimble. And one thing I felt like was there was opportunities lost by doing that, right? Like a classic example was e-commerce. I felt like that was something which needed to be there quickly, and it wasn't the case for what was going on at the time. And it took sort of several years to get e-commerce for where I was working at the time. And I personally felt like that was just way too long, right? You missed the boat, you missed the mark. You've got to be able to move quickly. So that was certainly something which I felt like was really important and I wanted to do differently. Things which I take is the benefit of working in a big team, right? The ability to have people who can do different things and do them well is a great asset. In the early days of a business, you can't do that. It's literally you've got to be there, you're doing it all, and that's fine. But as things grew, what I understood is that bringing in people who could do things well and focusing on what I enjoy is going to be where the best result comes from the business. And that's basically what a corporate is, right? A series of people who lean on each other's strengths.
Yeah. So when you talk about the things that you enjoy, how quickly did it become clear to you within the business the parts that you enjoyed and didn't and needed people to do those? Or was it obvious to you from the start, you just had to work your way to it?
That became apparent quite quickly. I'm dreadful at admin, not very good at numbers either, but love digital marketing. So when it comes to things like accounting and all of that, I was like, right, get rid of that. I do not want that in my life if I can at all avoid it. And then when it comes to the science of digital marketing, the creative side of product, the creative side of brand, love that. Give me that any day. So what I chose to do was to spend my time on that. And that's ultimately been what's grown the business. And then as things did start to move, I had the ability to outsource and find people who could be good at the things which I wasn't, which was, as I said, accounting, numbers, anything in that domain, find people to support with that.
And so you started the business with nothing. I've read that I think you might have even sold your car and those sorts of things back in the early days. Is that right, to get things going?
I did sell my car because you've got to find your seed capital from somewhere. And for me, it was in the form of the car.
Yeah, perfect. So you've started from scratch, right? And you've built business up. Can you give us an idea of sort of how far the business has come now in terms of whether it's some sort of numbers or ideas around people or product and that type of thing?
Yes, so I've never viewed headcount as being something which is important. I think that's a bit of a trap which startups can fall into. They value their business by how many people they've employed, not by the amount of money they're making or turning over. I've always taken the view that you've got to find the right people, but they can be anywhere in the world. So we employ people up in the Philippines, up in China, and we've got some part-time and freelancing people who we work with here with literally only one person on the payroll. In terms of revenue, we turn over $4.5 million AUD annually. And for where I'm at right now, that's beautiful. I've got 2 little children. I can operate a business from anywhere in the world and choose to work when I want. So to be honest, I'm not out there trying to grow that. I feel like what I found is quite a nice sweet spot. To go in and try and hunker down and rapidly expand is just not somewhere where I'm at right now. For me, this is perfect.
Yeah, okay. How difficult was it in the early days with young kids trying to balance all of these types of things?
I didn't have them then.
Right. Okay. Well, that's easier.
Certainly much easier. No, my children are 2 and 2 months. So right now I'm in a position to be able to take a step back and work as I need to, which is a real luxury, which is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to start the business in the first place. But certainly trying to go and, book one-way tickets to India and be up there for 6 weeks, 8 weeks at a time with 2 under 2, no. So I think I was probably quite aware of that too. I was 27 when I started, and I felt like there's a window in time where you can do this. Not that it becomes impossible, but when you've got a mortgage and small liabilities, it's harder, right? So you've got to pick your window in life. And I think I was aware of that when I left my corporate job. At the end of the day, if it all fell over, I could eat some noodles for a while and that would be okay.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things especially with younger people, before they've got those commitments. I always look at it and think it's so much easier to start and do things when you're early 20s, no commitments, whatever it might be, because like you say, if it goes to crap, you can eat noodles, you can take it easy, and there's no pressure in that way. It seems like pressure at the time probably when you're younger, but it's not the same. And so to be able to take that time to live on lower income while you build a business for the future benefit of having something like what you're talking about now, which gives you that flexibility and financial freedom to live your life how you want to, it's well worth it for a young person to do.
And I think, and as you say, I think the big thing is that the time it takes. One thing which I probably wasn't as aware of as I should have been is how long it can take and how little you'll have to work with during that time. Because if you want to grow a business, ultimately, all of the money which you're making is going to be plowed back into it to buy more product. And during that time, you literally can't pull anything out of it. And so I think that's where, now that I've got to a place where I don't want to aggressively grow it anymore, part of that reason is A, the headaches which would come with that next level, and B, the fact that constantly reinvesting for growth means that you're not in a position to pull anything out. And I'm in a position and a stage of life now where I do want to be able to do that. So certainly timing is key when you start a business, because you've got to allow for the years in order to develop it to the point where you can pull money out.
When you talk about you sort of started the business with an eye on the future of how things might play out down the track and how you might want things set up, do you look at that same sort of scenario going forward from now in terms of what the business might look like down the track? And what I'm getting at is, do you look at the business now and go, this is how I want it to go for the next 5 years or 10 years? Or are there changes that you've got in mind for later, or not really?
Something I've always considered is going down the retail path.
Yeah.
What does that look like? does an expansion into stores work? Because I'm quite aware that not everybody wants to shop online. Certainly it's a growing contingent of shoppers, but not everybody is out there, buying online. It's just not where the entire customer bases are at. So that's always something which I thought about and we're looking into. Again, like I've said, for the stage of life that I'm at now, that's not on the pipeline because I know that would be a lot of work. You've got to go in there and, there's like a lot of work to set up those networks and to get that going. Certainly something which I'd be interested in doing in a couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about priorities, isn't it? Everyone's got X amount of time and it depends how you want to spend that time. What about COVID? You talked about that, how you said that was very difficult as well. How did that play out from your perspective?
So very difficult, but also a great opportunity. So I think the nature of the product is one which women wear to offices and they wear out. What was happening during COVID? Neither of those things, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay.
People just didn't have an inherent need for the product. So, I was there with all of the stock and had a business which had done well, but all of a sudden people stopped shopping to the same extent that they were because they just did not need what I was selling.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think the beauty of where I was at the time was being online because you do have the ability to be nimble. Like what I said was always a difficulty which I faced in the corporate world was the greater benefit when you're in a business which is still essentially a startup. So what I did was set up within a couple of days online stores in the US, Canada, and the UK, and basically started running meta ads to those countries, knowing that there would be pockets of the world which aren't in lockdown, where people are still going to work, they're still living their life, they've still got disposable income. It's just a different life that they'd be living, one which is compatible with buying silk shirts. And I was able to find different markets and ship to them quite quickly and easily. Also ones where the cost of acquiring customers were cheaper because things became expensive depending on what was happening at the time. And basically I was able to grow the business during COVID when I thought it was going to retract. So even though the Australian market came down, other markets were able to lift the overall growth. So that was turned into an opportunity. But that's the summary in hindsight. In the moment, when you've got doom and gloom on the news and everybody's bunkering down, you're sitting there staring down the barrel of what the year could look like, and you're faced with what felt like an insurmountable challenge at the time for what I was selling.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to look back in hindsight and see how it all played out. But at the time, you're trying to work it out as you go.
That's right.
In real time. That's just trial and error, and that's guesswork, right? Because no one's been through that. There's no answer. There's no textbook.
There's no textbook for that. There's no manual. That's right.
So part of that growth was effectively born out of necessity to look for new customers. Was the genesis of that in terms of looking to how to grow and find more customers? Or was it because when COVID sort of hit, you've got stock and you've got to move that stock in terms of that instant? Was it you've got stock and you've got to work out how to move that? Or was it like, well, we've got to keep the business going. How do we find new customers? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was a bit of both. To be honest, A, I've got stock. B, I don't want to just shut up shop. How do I find a way forward? And sometimes it's interesting, the old story, necessity can be the mother of invention, right? And that was certainly the case with my business, what I was doing. And I think what I knew was that I was enjoying the life, right? I was enjoying the business. I was proud of what I was doing. I didn't want to just say, oh, well, here's COVID. I've just got to shut up shop. It was making money. And I'd actually gotten it to a point where I was being able to draw money out. It was growing. Everything was moving in the right direction. What I wanted to do was find a way forward, given the change of circumstances.
What's the best advice you've had along the way?
Oh, there's been lots of advice. I think being actively involved in the business yourself was a big one. Ultimately, nobody's going to care as much as you. Nobody's got as much skin in the game as you. Nobody will be as motivated as the person who's got everything to lose. So you've got to really make sure you keep your finger on the pulse, outsource enough, but not too much, and make sure that you've got to stay involved and you've got to stay hungry along the way.
What was some of the biggest mistakes you've made along the way? What were obviously that first one where you talked about that, but what about later on as you sort of thought everything's going along great? COVID, no one can control. But what about some of the things that you've looked at and thought, oh, shouldn't have done that. I thought everything was, anything that comes to mind like that type of thing where you've had to work out something?
Yeah, look, I think what I was quite ignorant to in the early days and, still I've had to learn a lot along the way was how to structure things so that you get your affairs set up in a way which is going to future-proof them. We had to make a few changes and that ended up being expensive. And that's something which if I had a crystal ball, I would have gone back and got a bit of advice on that. I think things like And it can be really tricky at the time. Things like setting up your trademark. That's really important. Go through, do that properly. It feels like an expense at the time, but it's something which is really important, because if you've got a fully fledged business, everything's working. If somebody comes along and they want to set up a business in your name, all of a sudden you're facing challenges because you don't have the right protection in place.
Yeah.
Getting everything structured so you're doing things correctly from, a government's perspective, really important. It's something which I think you've got to pick your battles as to what you invest in when you've got literally a car to fund your business. But I think that would be one which I would say, if you believe in what you're doing, get everything set up properly.
Did you think about raising money from other sources when you started, or you decided you wanted to own all the business, or how was the thought process there?
Yeah, so one of the things which I didn't want to do was have a boss. I had one in the corporate world. I had a few, and that was fine. That was great learnings. But for what I wanted for the next chapter was to ultimately work for myself. If you take on money, what you're doing is reporting to someone. And I never wanted to do that. I always wanted to be able to make decisions myself, but determine my own lifestyle. I didn't want to have to report in. So that was something which I decided from quite early on in the piece that I didn't want to do. And I was prepared to bootstrap the growth in the business until the point where I could get there. Having said that, though, it was right for my business. It's not right for everyone, because it slows things down. If you're in a position to go in and take on money, you can grow quicker, and being first to market in some industries is pivotal. For me, I had the luxury of being able to build it up in a more staggered way and was happy to bootstrap.
In terms of seeing how the business has grown, would you have reconsidered that, knowing what you know now, or would you have still done it the same way because the same things fundamentally are true for you?
Yeah, same things are fundamentally true, and I wouldn't have done it any other way.
Yeah.
One of the things which I think is important as well is that if you make mistakes, if you're limited to a certain extent by the amount of money you've got, you can only make mistakes to a certain extent. If you go off and raise millions of dollars, you make a mistake, get your production wrong, that can be catastrophic. End of business. You're sort of limited, and that can be good and bad. For me, I wouldn't change anything in terms of that path.
Were you always entrepreneurial? So you've started the business, you were in the corporate world before that. Got a marketing degree or a marketing background?
Your marketing background, yeah.
Tell us about your earlier thought process around business and entrepreneurship.
I would never say that I was entrepreneurial. I don't identify with that word. What I wanted was freedom. I loved the idea. That was what I was really driven by. I wanted to be able to control my schedule. I wanted to be able to work when I wanted to work. I wanted to have autonomy over my life. And I knew that a long-term corporate life wasn't going to provide that. So for me, I was lifestyle driven.
Did you know that before you started the corporate world, or you realized that as you went through it and like, this is not for me?
Realized it as I went through it.
Are there anyone that you look to as an inspiration or aspiration in terms of the way they go about business, or any people that you sort of looked at and thought, I like the way they do that in the sort of same industry? Is it?
Yeah. I mean, what I always looked at is as women who had little children and who were having their business as well. I think for me, that was always where, you look to what you relate to, what you want to be for the future. And at that point in time, it was very much for me, right, when I've got a couple of little kids, how can I make this work? How can I do it so that I can balance my family life with my business life, not having to choose one or the other, being able to have both? And while that means that the juggle is very real, what that ultimately means is that I can have both. And I always look to women who had set up a business and were doing so with a family as being inspiration to what I wanted as well. There's a lady called Anna Lay. She's the founder of Vita Glow. She's got 4 little children and they've done amazingly well. They sell a collagen product all through Asia. Have always looked at her and thought that she was amazing. Oh, there's been a few over the years. I'm trying to think. She was the big one who I always thought was a rock star.
Anybody that you've looked to for mentorship in that same way, or like that you knew, or is it really people you read about or see that have done that?
Yeah, I've never really looked to mentorship. I've listened to podcasts along the way and really enjoyed them. A big one I enjoy at the moment is called Perpetual Traffic. It's a great online resource about digital marketing. So always lean into that. I've enjoyed the odd founder story as well. But I think each journey is different. I think that I've never sought out mentorship per se. Yeah. Definitely advice on specific challenges, but in terms of having a specific mentor, no.
What do you most enjoy about what you do?
Digital marketing, the science behind that. I love the whole business of how you get cost per acquisitions and how that relates to average order value. how it ties into customer lifetime value. There's very much a science in digital, and that is 150% what I love, live and breathe that.
And you say you don't like numbers.
You're right. I don't like numbers from an accounting perspective.
No, I understand. Yeah. Because it sounded very much like you like numbers when you're talking about all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you're right. That is number space. Those kinds of numbers I do love them.
That comes back to, that's sort of quantifying the psychology of consumers, isn't it? In many respects.
That's right.
So
that's exactly right.
Is that part of it that's fascinating? Because I know you're looking at the numbers, but is it really, because you're trying to get inside the minds of people who are buying effectively, right? Is it the numbers and there's metrics behind it that you find fascinating, or is it really what that tells you to do, where that directs you? Is it the psychology of the consumer?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The numbers represent the psychology. So that you're exactly right. That's what I love. Back in the old school world, it was people walking into, department stores, choosing on this, trying on that, and the service people, this color looks good on you. And digital format's all about all of them, what that spits out in terms of what people want.
You can quantify that experience effectively now, right? That is fascinating to see the mindset of what drives people to make various decisions. What's the most surprising thing in terms of numbers? I've talked to a couple of founders on different things, and they found within their business that suddenly they did this change and sales spiked by 50% or whatever along those types of lines. Is there anything that comes to mind where the numbers told you something that was really surprising?
Anything specifically surprising? I mean, look, the biggest thing which you live and die by is your conversion rate, right? Always knew that, but even having understood the numbers quite well, move your conversion rate by 0.5%, and that's an absolute game changer to the business. Anyone in digital marketing gets the importance of that, but sometimes there can be a lot of importance placed on ads. How do you promote? How do you get out there and reach new people? Whereas actually, you take a step back, you get your heat maps right, you drill into your site, you figure out where the drop-offs are, what's your conversion rate from add to cart, from initiate checkout to conversion, how can you improve that? And all of a sudden, you're working slightly not harder. With the people who you're bringing in, you can make more money out of the ones who are coming to your site. And I think that's probably something which can be under-considered in the realm.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of the business and your customers, how do you want the happy customer to describe your business at the end of the day? For you to look at it and go, yeah, we've really succeeded in doing what I'm trying to do. How would a customer describe, and is that a way of measuring success?
Absolutely. Yeah, something which I always cared very much about was having a product which was built to last. I hated the idea of fast fashion where people would buy something and wear it for a season and throw it out because it was no longer good. It was either highly seasonal, so it wasn't relevant the following year, or it wasn't built to go the distance. So what I've always focused on is creating a core range of product which can transcend seasons. So we don't lean into trend. If there's an orange color which is hot one season, we generally don't make that. It's all about producing staples so that people can wear them year after year. Equally, what we care very much about is making sure that the product can be, most silk shirts are dry clean only. We care about ones which can be washed and washed well, and then 2, 3, 4 years later, people are still wearing them. What I get the biggest kick out of, and I define as being a great success measure, is when we get the odd email from people saying, hey, I bought your shirt 4 years ago. I'm still wearing it. I've washed it God knows how many times, and it still looks fantastic. That is, for me, is success, because that's a sustainable product as well, which is really important. I care about that. I care about making sure that I'm not contributing to fast fashion, about how people can buy something and wear it for a long time, cost per wear. Those are all the things which are really important for the business. And I would define it as very much.
Okay, no, I find that fascinating. That often people, and I've got no real knowledge in this field, but you talk about fashion trends and things like that. And so that's the first thing that an outsider would look at and think, oh, that stuff matters. But what you're talking about is, it sounds like, and I don't want to say the wrong thing, but it sounds like you're looking at it going from a consumer's perspective. You made the shirts to be how you want to live in a pragmatic way, so that you're getting value for money. This is the sort of shirt you've developed for you that it makes sense. It's not about fashion as such. I'm probably saying the wrong thing, because obviously it still looks good and it does what it. Right. Yeah. Okay.
It still needs to be. I wanted it to be stylish, I think was probably the right word. I wanted it to be stylish, but it needs to be practical, and it needs to be something which is hard wearing too.
Yeah. So it's not driven by the fashion seasons and all that type of thing. What is the driver? What in your mind? What is and you've probably described it. little part of the conversation. But what in more succinct terms, what is the driver of what you're creating?
I mean, you mean the driver for me or the driver?
The driver for you. What are you trying to create in the product?
And from a product standpoint, something which people can wear, live in, and love. That's ultimately that's very much something which I want. That's the driver.
That's what I was trying to get to in a very clumsy way.
No, not at all. That's exactly what I've always wanted, is to create something which adds value and people can go to work and then feel good in.
And do you find that the consumer and the people who are your loyal customers are a certain type of people that value those things obviously above all else in many respects, because that's word of mouth? Is that where it comes from, or is how does you grow the brand in that way?
Word of mouth is a big one. I think, the benefit of clothing, of course, people can wear them, people can ask, and also never underestimate the extent that women can talk.
Yeah.
So, I think it's a great thing. Women go to work and they ask each other questions, and word of mouth has been huge. In terms of a customer base, I have 10% of our customers who represent a significant contribution to business, and they are typically the corporate women who don't want to have to think about what they wear in the morning.
Yes.
So they bought one shirt, got their size right, and then went on to buy a dozen more, and then just wear them on high rotation to work. And we love those customers.
Yeah, perfect. Sophie, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for the insights. It was fantastic.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.